Hi, and welcome to the next video of our seminar History of English 2, from synthetic to analytic. In this session, we're going to discuss the second part of our Middle English block. In this part, we're going to focus on Middle English dialects. We're going to illustrate the different dialectal features of Middle English using the text, the Middle English text, the Owl and the Nightingale. And after that, we're going to listen to a Middle English song to cheer you up in these weird times of Corona crisis. And finally, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do next. Right, but let's start with a brief overview of Middle English dialects. Right, so last week we talked about the fact that in the period that we now call Middle English, England was actually a quite a rich area in terms of linguistic diversity, right? So we had different varieties of Middle English, with Kentish being spoken in the Kent area of the very southeast of England, then the southern Middle English dialect being spoken, not surprisingly, in the south of England, then sort of northern varieties, northern dialect of Middle English being spoken in the north of England, to the south of Scotland, and then in between, in the Midlands, we have two different dialectal areas. On the one hand, West Midlands, and on the other hand, East Midlands. Then, of course, there are still widely being used the Celtic languages, right, in Scotland, Scots Gaelic in Ireland, Irish Gaelic, Welsh in Wales, and also Cornish in the southeast part of England, and Manx on the Isle of Man. We also have in this time a community that speaks Old Norse, the language that the Viking invaders of Old England actually brought with them. We also have Anglo-French, or French as the language of the newly installed elites after 1066, brought from France or from Normandy with William the Conqueror. And then we also have Latin as the official language of the Church, of the Catholic Church, of the universities, and also as a language being used for different official purposes, for different official texts being published in that time in England. Right. But now let's focus on the dialects and varieties of Middle English. So I said that there are these 5 basic dialectal areas: the Northern Middle English, the Southern Middle English, West Midlands, East Midlands, and Kentish. And if we have a look at West and East Midlands, we can actually say that East Midlands are sort of more aligned with the Northern variety, whereas West Midlands are more aligned with the Southern Middle English dialect. Right. But now let's have a look at how these dialects actually differ and what features distinguish them from one another. Right. So if we look at spelling and sound, so pronunciation, we will see this picture, right? So there are these three basic categories. Kentish is now sort of being left out of the picture, and Midlands are being conflated towards one mixed group between North and South, but this is basically the picture. You can find more details on this in the preparatory text that you are supposed to read for our next session. But the upshot here is that as far as phonology and pronunciation is concerned, the northern varieties are more conservative than the south. And different pronunciation changes that ultimately made it into the English standard originated from the South. If we look at Middle English grammar, however, we'll see quite a different picture. We will actually see that the different grammatical innovations come from the from the North, right? So, whereas pronunciation, the North did not really, was not really successful. As far as grammar is concerned, the northern varieties of Middle English were sort of the start of the standard English grammar that we know nowadays. And that's and the reason for that is to a large degree due to the high degree of language contact between English and Old Norse, the language brought by the Viking invaders of England during the Old English times, right? But now let's have a look at how these different dialectal features look like if we look at the map, right? So this is the map of the different English varieties, and we actually see what I've already said, that phonological innovations, if we look backwards from the position of today's standard, the southern varieties actually managed to spread their innovations to the standard, whereas the northern varieties managed to, or were more successful in introducing grammatical innovations. Right. So let's have a look at the changes to pronunciation or dialectal differences between pronunciation in Middle English times. So we have the first feature here, the so-called southern rounding, right? So we have here something in the north that would be pronounced as harm, and something in the south that would be pronounced as home, right? So that's the present-day English word for home, right? The cognate in present-day German would be heim, and we have a R sound in the north and O sound in the south. And we see that if we go towards the standard English, we see that the southern varieties actually prevailed. Now, if we look at something that is called voicing of initial fricatives, we will see that words such as father or seven, right, are pronounced father and seven in the north, but in the very south, and in particular in the Kentish-speaking area, we see a voicing of these initial fricatives. So that in the south, we would not hear something like father, but rather vader, or not seven, but zeven. We'll see that in a second. But here, again, the innovation, or what the feature that made it to the English standard comes from the north. Right. Now here are two different grammatical features. The one is the present participle, right? The modern English or the present-day English form would be the ing form. And we actually see that this is the one that made it to the standard, right? So the northern ones, or the East Midland ones, and or end, right? So the cognate in present-day German would be END, right? Kochend, and so forth. In present-day English, we have only the ing form. And if we look at the past participle form, right? So if you remember what we discussed during our Old English sessions, you know that Old English had this past participle prefix written as GE, right? The thing that you know from German, for example, right? Gemacht, gekocht, and so forth. In Old English, it was pronounced as a y, right? So je wordt, and in Middle English, this is rendered only with the Y prefix, right? You still have a remnant of this prefix actually in present-day English words such as enough, right? Again, the German cognate of that would be genug, right? Genug, enough. And this E prefix, the remnant of the Old English grammar, here is actually only retained in the southern varieties, and the northern varieties progressively abandon that. Okay, now if you look at the ending for the third person singular of verbs, we will see that we have the th ending in the south, right? So something like he maketh or he singeth and so forth. Whereas in the north, we have the s ending, right? So he makes, he sings. So the north has actually the feature that we know from present-day English, whereas the th ending of the south gets only pushed towards contexts that are either biblical or very archaic nowadays, right? So, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. And then we have this mixed area in the middle, in the Midlands, where we have still the th ending for the third person singular, which aligns with the southern varieties, and we have then something that neither the north nor the south actually has in Middle English, and that is a unified ending for the forms of the plural, right? So we maken and not we make. Okay. So again here we go, grammatically speaking, from the north towards the south. Now if you look at the third person singular feminine pronoun, what we now know as she, we will see that in the south, right, in the southern varieties and in the West Midlands varieties, we will actually have the original, older, more archaic Old English form hail, whereas in the North and East Midlands, we find a more innovative form, show or she. So again, here, this innovation goes from the north towards the south. Right, so here is a short overview. Again, this is everything to be found in the text that you're supposed to read in preparation for our next session. And now let's have a look at the text of The Owl and the Nightingale. Okay, so the Owl and the Nightingale is a lovely text about two birds, the owl and the nightingale, and they are actually fighting about who is the better bird, right? And then the owl brings arguments why the owl is the better bird, and the nightingale does the same for the nightingale. And this is how the text looks like. I'm not going to really read that out loud now, but we are only going to focus on the dialectal features that you have in the text and that I have just now shortly and briefly sketched in the preceding slides. Right. But what we see here is this ho is actually a form of the version show, right? Or hail. Right, but what we see now here is that if we look at the second line from the top here, we see ho, which is actually a form of hail, right? The more archaic, the original form of the third person singular, right? The feminine pronoun. What we then see here is also in the first line, elester, right? So last, and the past participle of the verb to last is elester, again something that points us more towards a southern variety of Middle English. We have here the more archaic hail, and here we have the verbal prefix for the past participle, here written as an I, but it can just as well be written as an Y, elester, last. Then we also have here, in this word, shall, we have a change or a pronunciation feature, the fronting of s to sh. So in the northern dialects, you would find something like sal or sal, whereas in the southern varieties of Middle English, you find shall. What you then find is, right here, misliketh if it is so long, misliketh if it is so long, the third person present tense singular, ETH, right, so TH. Again, it tells you that this is not a text from the north, because in the north, you would expect something like an S ending, mislikes, not misliketh. Right. If we look at this, for me, we also actually see that in the first half here, for harpe, right, for harpe and piepe, and für le song. Here we see for me as laughter Christus huse. We see something that we discussed a couple of slides ago as initial fricatives that are voiced, right? So normally we would have something like for me, but here the fricative f is voiced and it has the form vor. It's also rendered as such in the spelling by using the V and not an F. And the same would also be the case for things like seven instead, or zeven instead of seven. Right. And what we also see here on the one hand side, the first person singular pronoun for I, right, in Middle English, each. And here the word for church, right, anek at churche. So this is something that also distinguishes southern varieties of Middle English from their northern counterparts. So in southern Middle English, we have a lot of palatalization going on. So it's not ik, but ich, and it's not a kerk or kirk, but a church. Right. So all these different things actually tell us that this text comes from the southern parts of the Middle English speaking area. And by the fact that we have here the voiced fricatives, which are actually the most sort of salient feature of the Kentish dialect, we can actually be pretty sure that this is really a southern text. Right. Southern or southeastern Middle English text. Right. So we are almost at the end, but I have promised you to cheer you up in these Corona times, and doing Middle English during the Corona crisis is actually quite nice because we can listen to a Middle English song. The title is Summer is ikumenin, right? The summer has come. You can also find a video on that for that on YouTube. Here is the original text of the song with a translation in Latin and the notes. And here is the text of the song, and here please listen to the song being sung in Middle English for you right now.
Groweth sad and bloweth mad and swing the road and on. Sing ho ho, our letteth after long of laughter carve the cuckoo, the sick, the marvelou.
Okay, so next time we are going to wrap up our block on Middle English by looking at how impoliteness or politeness was expressed in Middle English by means of pronouns. We are going to do that by looking at passages from the text Silke Wine and the Green Knight. And in order to prepare you for that session, please have a look at the preparatory text uploaded on Blackboard. If you have any questions, you can ask me at any time. But if you are interested in more details about the Middle English dialects and different varieties of English being spoken in that time, feel free to have a look at the so-called LALME or eLALME, the electronic version of a linguistic atlas of late medieval English, where you can actually have a look at the different features that distinguish the different varieties from each other. And you'll get this map that tells you where the different features are used. You see here on this map, for example, the feature at as a infinitive marker, so that you see that in the northern parts under the influence of Old Norse. In Middle English, you got at as a infinitive marker as opposed to in the southern varieties, right? So to make something in the south, but at make something in the north. Right. That was all. Thank you for watching and have a nice week and see you next time. Bye.